Folks, happy Tuesday evening, and thanks for joining us for another episode of CPAC Now. No need to adjust your screen, no need to adjust your mobile devices. Matt Schlapp is on the road, making sure that all of our supporters in the great state of Florida know how to stay in touch with us, and I'm his fill-in guest in the anchor chair this evening, Ian B. Walters, ACU and CPAC Communications Director. We're going to be joined by our Vice Chair and CEO of Quantum Communications from Harrisburg, PA, Charlie Gerow, in just a moment. But one of the hot issues that we're tackling in this episode is what's happening at the southern border and how it impacts you, your job, your livelihood, and your security. Let's take a look first at what Kamala had to say. Kamala Harris, Vice President, had to say on the topic just yesterday.
Do you plan to visit the border?
Not today, but I have before, and I'm sure I will again. Yeah.
Well, my question on the border. There's obviously a lot of political pressure coming from Republicans in particular on this administration, but also some of the Democrats who represent some of those border districts. What can the administration do, at least in the short term, to kind of assure people that it's really taking steps to make sure that the children in particular, are being treated humanely, but also that you're sort of, thinking about the bigger picture weeks and months ahead?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we were left with a very challenging situation. And, let me start by saying I think we all agree, and Secretary Mayorkas said it a number of times this weekend, let's get these kids out of CBP custody, get them into HHS custody. We've got to treat this issue in a way that is reflective of our values as Americans and do it in a way that is fair and it is humane. But we have to meet the moment, and there's a lot of work going into that, and we expect to have success, but it's going to take a lot of work. I mean, again, we were presented when we came in with some serious challenges.
And welcome to CPAC Now, ACU Vice Chairman Charlie Gerow. How is it out there in Harrisburg on this Tuesday evening?
When we taped this in, it was about as good as it gets for a mid-March day, and it's great to be with you on CPAC Now.
You are our friend and ally, and we have a good time when we get together, and even when we get to do opportunities like this, talking to conservatives across America and across the globe. Kamala Harris, though, seemed to be having a really good time yesterday tackling this topic of the crisis, or the circumstances, Jen Psaki might say, at the southern border. She had a good hearty laugh about the whole thing, whether she would go down there and travel to the border. Do you think this is a laughing matter, or this is something that Americans need to be taking seriously?
Well, on the contrary, it's no laughing matter at all. And my sense is that the reason that the vice president wants to laugh is that it's too old to cry for her. I mean, the situation at the southern border right now, Ian, can only be described as a crisis. Unfortunately, this administration can't get to that fact, so they call it a challenge. Well, it's much more than that. And it's really some deplorable conditions there and a serious threat to our national security. And Americans all over the country realize what's going on. It's a shame that the administration apparently does not.
Jen Psaki had to answer some tough questions on Monday. A reporter in the briefing room asked her why the administration has decided to spend, I think it's $84 million, housing some of these folks who have crossed the border illegally, putting them up in hotel rooms, and contrasted it with the treatment of the National Guardsmen last month when it came to having them have to defend the Capitol, put the wall up at the Capitol instead of the southern border, and had them sleeping in essentially parking garages there on Capitol Hill. Doesn't that seem to jibe? There's a tweet from a Wendy Rogers, who's a legislator in Arizona. She says, DC gets a wall, but our border doesn't. Illegals get hotels and our National Guard get garage floors. Illegals get stimulus payments and our businesses can't open. We have to shut down and wear masks to prevent COVID, and Biden lets COVID come through our border. What a disgrace. The folks who were in Arizona definitely have a unique perspective. A lot of these folks who have crossed illegally into our country are being released directly into their communities without a court date, without an appearance to stand in front of a magistrate. And the onus is put on the lawbreaker in order to have to reach out to law enforcement and a judge to set their own court date. What kind of impact is this going to have? You mentioned national security. There's obviously an economic impact. Charlie, what's the broad nature of this immigration crisis?
Well, you laid out a lot there, Ian. So let me see if I can start from the top and kind of walk through it. Because going back to the statement of Kamala Harris about not going to the southern border, ha ha ha, they're not allowing anybody to see what's going on there. I mean, this administration that promised the world and the American people transparency and honesty has literally locked the media out of this situation, and by so doing, locked the American people out of seeing what's really going on there. And now Jen Psaki says, well, we're going to get around to it. We're going to figure out how to I mean, you and I both know, Ian, because we're in the media business, that it would take about 5 minutes to say a pool reporter and camera person can go in there and show the world what's going on. But obviously, they don't want to do that. And there's good reason politically for them not to let people see what's going on. But on a broader sense, which is the question that you asked on immigration, I think it's important to note that the American Conservative Union has a very interesting perspective on immigration, because I personally am an immigrant. I carried a green card. I know what the immigrant experience is all about. We have other folks who are second generation Americans. Mercy Schlapp's family immigrated here from Cuba. And so we understand the immigrant problem well. And most of us go back to the famous statement by Father Theodore Hesburgh from the University of Notre Dame, who said we must keep the front door of legal immigration open so that we can slam the back door of illegal immigration tightly closed. And unfortunately, right now, as you've pointed out, we're treating illegal immigrants better than we've treated our own service people.
You know, Mark Levin said at CPAC several years ago, we don't have an immigration problem, we have a citizenship problem. And whether that quality of being a United States citizen means anything, or it's been watered down so much at this point that it doesn't matter anymore. It is outrageous, as you say, that reporters are not able to get in to view these conditions. 15,000 young people in some of these facilities that they've built. That's like a Phillies game or an Orioles game, even in a bad year. You know, one of the mainstream reporters, and the mainstream media just sort of goes along with this. They say, sure, Jen Psaki, we'll wait for you to feed us whatever you want to. Outrageous is the right word. One reporter in question, Ron Brownstein, who was very well regarded, but I'd like to get your opinion on this statement that he said. Ron Brownstein tweeted last week. He said, Biden is visiting blue-collar Pennsylvania today while Republicans try to shift focus to mitigate kids at border captures the key tension. Democrats will try to win more working-class voters by delivering them economic help. Republicans will try to hold them with the culture war. That's worked before, but stimulus is more help. This, Charlie, this goes to the Associated Press as well, formerly well regarded. While none of them voted for the package, this is the COVID relief package, their opposition was muted and they instead focused on culture war issues, like that debate over stereotypes in some Dr. Seuss books, rather than a bill that was broadly popular with GOP voters. What is with mainstream media reporters wanting to characterize conservatives' disagreements on legitimate policy issues as all culture war stuff?
Well, I'm really sure, Ian, that you're not surprised by some of the musings of folks in the quote unquote mainstream media, which has really become the left-wing media, increasingly so over the course of the past number of years. I mean, their linkage with the far left of the Democrat Party is now all too evident and obvious for most people. And when you say that being concerned about our national security is somehow a cultural war issue, you really understand where they're coming from. They're completely out of touch with the thinking of regular Americans, middle Americans, the people that work hard for a living and who support their families every single day and who are concerned about the security of our country, about our economy, and about the really, really awful conditions that are down at that southern border right now. President Biden would have done much better to have not made a political stop in Pennsylvania and instead gone himself down to see what his administration is doing on that southern border. Because when some Democrats have gone down there, Ian, as you know, Representative Henry Cuellar deplored those conditions every bit as much as his Republican counterparts.
You raise a certain point here that this may not just be a Republican issue, but there's widespread support for, at the very least, immigration reform, that we can't just sweep this problem under the rug and pretend that it's not happening. To wit, Senator Kristen Sinema signed on to a tweet with Texas Senator John Cornyn that says the administration must secure the border, protect Arizona communities, and ensure migrants are treated fairly and humanely. Humanely, along with the word circumstances, one of these words that Psaki and Biden and Kamala Harris, they all keep repeating the word humanely. But if you look at some of the images that came out yesterday of young kids sleeping en masse on concrete floors with space blankets, aluminum foil space blankets, this doesn't look like humane treatment to anybody. Charlie, do you think there's room for Republicans, for Democrats, for regular old liberals, as we used to call them, a blue dog Democrat and right-leaning Americans to come together on this issue and apply appropriate force to make the Biden administration, House Democrats and Senate Democrats to listen, to deal with this in a more reasonable way rather than just to pretend it's not happening?
Absolutely, Ian, and I think the time is now. I mean, if we don't have the opportunity to do it right now with some old line, quote unquote, liberal Democrats that were real Americans and the folks that are right of center, I don't know when we're going to be able to do it. I mean, the immigration system in this country has been broken for a long time. That's something I believe both the left and the right agree upon. But getting to a solution has been something that neither side has been willing to do. And now you've got a situation that if this had happened under the Trump administration, can you imagine what the media would be doing right now? And yet they're turning a blind eye willingly and knowingly on what's going on there and allowing the Biden administration to come up with a plan by which we'll get reporters in there. And maybe we, the Biden administration, will allow you to see some footage that we've carefully edited to make things look much better than they really are. I mean, I watched the new director of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, on television on Sunday, and I was appalled, not only by his arrogance, but by the fact that he apparently has much more compassion and empathy for children coming from Guatemala than he does for the American people and for our national security. Really troubling.
Preposterous. Charlie Gerow, we're going to let you have the last word on that note. Thank you for joining us again on CPAC Now. And here's something you and I can agree on. When you get back down here to DC or I get up there to Harrisburg, let's get a beer, man.
You got it.
Thanks, Charlie Gerow. See you soon. And let's take a look at what Matt Schlapp had to say this morning on Fox and Friends.
Part of this very troubling year.
All right, Matt Schlapp speaking very loudly at his home down in Florida. I hope you didn't wake Mercedes. Just saying. Matt, thank you.
She's in the background, Steve. She really is, in all candor.
Really? Can she hear me?
She can.
Well, okay, that's more like it. Hey, Mercedes, nice to see you, or hear you at least. All right, Schlapp family, thank you very much for joining us live.
Thank you, Steve.
And we're back with our second segment of Tuesday's CPAC Now. Thanks for joining us. I'd like to bring in our board member and Asia expert and friend and ally, Gordon G. Chang. Gordon, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Ian.
Can you let our audience know exactly what happened in Anchorage last week with the Chinese government officials meeting with the new American officials from the Biden administration? How did that go and what happened, and should we be concerned?
I think we should be deeply concerned. There are many aspects of this, Ian, but let me focus in on one of them. Yang Jiechi and Wang Yi, China's top two diplomats, rolled into Alaska not to have meaningful discussions with us, but I think to begin a propaganda campaign. First of all, we heard from Yang's comments. He's China's top diplomat. That, he talked about Black Lives Matter. He raised racial issues. Just after that, hours, the Chinese Foreign Ministry then issued a blast about the strong smell of gunpowder, quote unquote. For Chinese, that evokes the opium wars of the 19th century, basically whites against yellows. And I think that was intentional. And all while this was happening, there have been a number of propaganda releases, both before and after, which have talked about race in America, as well as race in Asia. And just to take one of them, Beijing was saying in an editorial in the Global Times, which means that this is semi-official, but it's really official. They were talking about America's alliances with Asian countries as basically centered on white supremacy, quote unquote, referring to the darker skin tones of our allies in the region. There's been a number of things that have also sort of buttressed this view of China really trying to divide democratic societies by race. They tried this in America, of course, inciting violence both this year and last year. They did this in Canada. Now they're doing this in Asia. This really looks like a beginning of a civilizational conflict. One more point. Xi Jinping, in a landmark speech at the end of last year, mentioned a signature line, quote, "The East is rising and the West is declining." He didn't say China is rising. And I think the reason is he's trying to get solidarity among non-whites in Asia against the United States. This is the same thing that the Japanese tried in the 1930s with their greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. So what we are seeing in North America and in Asia really is an attempt to create racial animosity. And this looks like the beginning of, and we're not there yet, but it looks like China's going to do this around the world. So we're talking about global race war is where China is pushing the world.
Gordon, for those of you who in the CPAC Now audience who have been following us for the past 5 years, Gordon Chang for that amount of time has been like Paul Revere for a lot of us, riding his horse down the road, ringing the bell, making sure that Americans are aware of the threat that China poses to the United States, our culture, our economy, and for better or worse, everything that Gordon has told us over the past 5 years has come true. So I want you guys to listen hard. What Gordon is saying is that there is, in addition to infiltration in the West, in our universities, in our culture, online, that they are also playing the same games in their part of the world, in the Eastern Hemisphere. Gordon, you know that there was a report that the Chinese Navy went into the South China Sea to pick up one of these islands known as a Philippine island. Are they making moves beyond the normal thing, beyond creating the islands that you've taught us about out of thin air? Are they making moves to acquire more territory? And do you have anything else to say about the War Games report that talked about perhaps a lackluster U.S. military impact should they do a land and air engagement against Taiwan?
Yes, what's happening right now, Ian, is there are more than 200 Chinese vessels around Whitsun Reef, which is in the Spratlys. The Spratlys, bunch of islands in the southern portion of the South China Sea. And this is generally considered to be part of the Philippines because it's within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone, which is that band of territorial water 200 nautical miles from the shoreline. This reminds us of what happened in early 2012. In early 2012, at Scarborough Shoal, which is about 124 nautical miles from the main island of Luzon, guards the mouths to Subic and Manila Bays, incredibly strategic. In early 2012, you had Philippine fishing vessels there, which is, of course, because it's part of the Philippines. It's within the EEZ, exclusive economic zone. But China put their fishing vessels there as well. To avoid a confrontation, Kurt Campbell, who is now Asia czar in the Biden administration, then in the Obama State Department, brokered a deal where both Beijing and Manila agreed to withdraw their craft. But only the Philippines complied, leaving China in control of Scarborough. Now, the Obama team did not want to do anything to antagonize China, so they didn't enforce the deal that they themselves had brokered. And right after Scarborough, we can say, well, it's just a few rocks at high tide. No, it's more than that, because what Beijing took away from that was that the Obama administration was not going to do anything to oppose Chinese aggression. And almost immediately after that, they began to militarize those islands in the Spratlys, those what we talk about as their military bases. They also put more pressure on other Philippine features in the South China Sea. And then they ramped up pressure on Japan's Senkaku Islands in the East China Sea. So China went out and made the problem bigger. And what we're seeing is the same tactics today. Another Philippine feature, close to the Philippines. You have the Chinese fishing vessels there trying to take it over. The Biden administration has said they side with the Philippines, but we haven't heard anything about what they're going to do about it. So we're seeing Scarborough Shoal all over again. This is a test of the Biden administration just hours after the Chinese diplomats flew back from Alaska.
Gordon, you and I are both Americans of Asian descent. Are the Chi-Coms, the Chinese communists, doing anything to foment this recent narrative of there being a rash of anti-Asian American violence? I think we know each other well enough to be able to speak frankly about instances that may have occurred in our lives. But what role are they playing as far as making sure that good, decent Americans are at war with one another?
Yeah, this is, there have been a number of propaganda pieces, especially from the Global Times, which is the tabloid controlled by the Communist Party. And their main theme, of course, is to aggravate the situation. What they're doing is they're talking about instances of hate against Asian Americans. And then they are saying, and this is the critical part, that criticism of China is causing hate crimes against Asian Americans, therefore trying to insulate themselves from criticism from Americans. This has one big issue for Asian Americans, and that is because a lot of Chinese Americans buy into this propaganda narrative, they are siding with the People's Republic. In other words, they're siding with an enemy of the United States. And therefore, other Americans legitimately can ask, what are Chinese Americans doing? And I think Chinese Americans are creating the conditions for hatred against them. I'm not condoning anything, but what I'm saying is that Chinese Americans are largely responsible for the attitudes of other Americans because for a very long time, they have been siding with China against the United States. And so, of course, they're going to cause friction. And indeed, there should be friction. And we should be calling out Chinese Americans and other Asians for siding with a hostile power.
From one proud American to another proud American, Gordon G. Chang, thank you for joining us. Folks, follow Gordon Chang on Twitter at Gordon G. Chang. He will give you the straight dope and make sure that you do not get wrapped up in, what's the word for it, the malarkey that perhaps is floating around there on the internet. Gordon, best to your lovely bride. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Ian. I really appreciate this.
And we're going to take one more look at what ACU Chairman Matt Schlapp had to say on Fox and Friends this morning.
That's right. And look, I run a nonprofit, so I have to raise funds for that nonprofit. The number one destination would have been to go to New York City to raise money for a nonprofit like mine. And now the center of gravity is to come to Florida. If you want to go meet with donors, they've either moved here or they're just spending a tremendous amount of time here. And Steve, when you talk about these corporate headquarters, read the press releases. There's all these euphemisms about regional synergies and how this helps with our distribution chain. That's a euphemism for we are fleeing the insanity of a depleted police force and defund the police, and what your story just on reparations in a Chicago suburb and the taxes and the regulations and the insanity of cancel culture. Yeah. These companies, even though they're woke, they realize it's an impractical way to run a company.
A lot of people ask us at CPAC and when we're on the road, where can we get the information that cuts through the mainstream media's noise and all of the nonsense that you may see on social media? Well, that's why you're here at CPAC Now, and I want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts for making sure that you join us for this episode, and then you join us again on Wednesday and Thursday at the same CPAC time, same CPAC channel at 7 p.m. Eastern. Be sure to follow us at CPAC on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We'll be joined tomorrow by Amber Athey and KT McFarland. We're going to preview some of the things that we expect to happen at the Joe Biden press conference on Thursday, if they can do it before his soup gets too cold. Our soup is warm here in the office. Thanks for joining us again, and we'll see you tomorrow for another edition of CPAC Now.